All right, so now we're on.
So I was listening to a Dharma talk a couple of days ago, and it was on the Satipatthana Sutta, and it was about body, and just
Mm-hmm.
something that clicked with me. I was kind of practicing while I was listening to it, and something clicked with me, taking refuge in the body, and it just clicked with me in a different way, where I could go I felt like I could get down into the body and experience from there in a different way, or I could sort of see thought process from the point of view of the body instead of it felt centered, you know. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that seemed like an important insight. It seems like something that needs to be developed, but I'm not sure.
I understand what you're talking about,
Hmm.
though we can only talk about it in the sense of concepts. It can actually be part of the experience. And not only that, but it's in all of our common language.
Hmm.
But when it's talked about it, especially out of old language, but what happens is that people talk about these things in conceptual terms, and so they just remain concepts rather than a reality. So let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. One of the things that they have is a distinction between the head and the heart. And because we have the heart that pumps, the blood pump in the chest area, that we associate that, but normally when we think of the heart in physiological terms, we're talking about it in the sense of emotion, which is controlled by the reptilian brain. However, the adrenal glands and a lot of other stuff is actually located in this area. And so when we talk about words like heart, we mean it in the sense of the center of things rather than emotions, thinking of it as the center of things. And so the heart, and in fact, in the old Indo-European language, it was the word hara, which is still used. And in fact, Brahma Vihara is the name of the word for the home of the gods or the center place. Another one is the word Vihara, which means basically the home of the monks, or going into the home or staying in the home. So a Vihara then is possibly a much better word than we have for monastery. And the Thai word wat is actually just the Thai way of taking the word Vihara and turning it into a very short word. They cut every word they learned from another language in half. Like, for instance, Kam and Duke and Suk are all of the Pali word, or the Pali words that have been cut in half. Um, Even the Pali word for hell, Narok, Naroka, is in the Thai language is Naro. So, uh, or Nauru. In any case, they cut the words in half. So the word Vihara, getting back to the word hara or heart, is that center area where we can actually experience. For instance, that's the place that you can experience anxiety. You can
Hmm.
experience, in fact, um, um, anger, and a little bit lower we would have for sadness or grief, or let us say an empty feeling. When students go on stage for to play music or do a recital or something like that, and they're not used to it, they will have what is called stage fright. But another word for it is butterflies in the stomach, where the stomach feels unsettled.
Or a pit in the stomach.
Right, exactly. Exactly what we're talking about here. All right. So if we can experience that part of the body in these, what I would call hell states, in the sense of anxiety or butterflies in the stomach or sadness, grief, etc., like that, then when we're not having any of those sensations or feelings, then we generally do not pay attention to that part of the body at all. It's kind of at a state of homeostasis. But you're right, in the Satipatthana Sutta, they say, oh no, this is in fact a way of experiencing while you're actually in a state of satisfaction. That we get ourselves in a good state and then we bring ourselves home into the body, experiencing the body literally from the inside out.
Yeah. And I've experienced it, and I've done body scans and stuff, but I've never saying the refuge thing just ticked something else off in my mind, and immediately I had a different understanding of, oh, you know, this is a place of refuge. You know, it is somewhere I can go. It quiets the mind almost immediately. It's like turns the mind
Mm-hmm.
into vibrating, electricity, or what,
Going, yes, exactly. Going to the heart of the matter, in fact, is we've got all of these conceptual language kinds of things, but it rarely, for most people, unless they know how to practice, can experience those things. So when they do experience what they experience it in the sense of emotions like anger, anxiety, grief, despair, all of that kind of stuff, as a negative sensation in the body. And so then that parts of the body that are associated with those kind of feelings, that kind of place in the body is a place for mentally most Westerners would think is a place to avoid, because that's the source of all of these bad feelings. But in fact, it's actually a very good thing to do is to get centered in the body. So now we have all of these other positive concepts of being centered, being at home, being in the body, being now one of the things about the Goenka method with the scanning is that only occasionally would he talk about it going inside the body, that normally the body scans is done on the surface of the body. And we talk about the body parts instead of starting at the top of the head and moving down around the skull. But he never does talk about it. What is it like inside the sinuses? What sensations and what feelings and what pressures and all of that do you have? Well, sometimes people do experience the inside of their sinuses when they're stopped up. But what are the sinuses like when it's free flowing and you can really breathe well? Now the sinuses feel really good when you take a deep breath. And we can begin to go into the body. Another part of the Anapanasati is that Goenka didn't talk about much, but Bhikkhu Buddhadasa does, in the sense of following the breath or chasing the breath, in the sense of as we're breathing in, the awareness will go down from the nose or the nostrils and the front part down into the throat area. At the back of the throat, there's a place where it's like this, that you breathe in and then the direction changes and it goes down. We're talking about that back point inside the head, where the air passage is fairly close to a part of the brain that is called the amygdala. You know the function of the part of the brain called the amygdala.
That's the
That's
reptile.
the source of inside the reptile brain. It's the source
Right.
of fear and anxieties and all of that kind of stuff. So paying attention and putting our awareness to the back of the throat while we're breathing in will help pacify or ameliorate the job of the amygdala. It's almost like patting a dog on the head.
Yeah, I can feel that.
Okay, and so then down deeper into the throat. And so that's the way that we can do is we can actually go down inside the lungs and feel the lungs inside. We can get a kind of experience how much moisture there is in there, because there's always too much moisture in the form of phlegm and sometimes pus and inside the lungs. And so getting that stuff cleared out and getting the lungs really empty and in shape and in good condition to do the job can actually be felt on the inside. And then down into the spleen area, there is an area down in there that's kind of between the lungs where the rib cage opens. This is the place now where most people think of as the hara. It's that center area where there's not a lot actually going on, but it's certainly in the middle of everything that's going on. It's associated with the heart itself and with the lungs and with the diaphragm. It's that diaphragmatic area. And so as you're breathing in, putting the attention down inside the body, inside the chest, inside that area is quite relaxing, giving us a sense of centeredness and well-being, a way of coming home by thinking, not just thinking about, but actually experiencing the physical sensations of that area of the body inside. There's an entire system of feeling throughout the body called the proprioceptive sensing system. And that we can experience that with the hands. For instance, close your eyes and put your hand up in the air. And now wave it around and move it a little bit. And while you're got your eyes closed, you recognize, okay, so now stop it from moving. And then open your eyes and check to see, is the hand where you thought it was?
Yeah.
How do you know that? It's certainly not from skin touch.
No. Weight.
Very complex. It's a lot of
yeah.
stuff, and that whole lot of stuff is called the proprioceptive sensing system. Now, that's referred to in the Mahasi method in the rising, falling, touching, and sitting. The rising and falling is the breathing up and down. The touching is the outside of the body, but the sitting is actually now getting in touch with the proprioceptive system of going in the body as the body is just sitting. And so we start to experience the body on the inside. This is what we actually do mean by experiencing the whole body, as opposed to just the outside of the body. But most of the students, they still think of the whole body as only the surface of it, rather than going really deep into the body. And congratulations, you just figured that out. I actually don't talk about this very much to the students because it's, I don't know, maybe it's
probably gone
them.
over my head. It's probably I've probably heard it a million times and it's gone over my head every time. But for some reason, I heard the right words at the right time, and it hit with me. But also, it's a thing of when right view is like there. It's just more, I feel like it's freestyling now. Like I'm just kind of freestyling, and that I've kind of kicked off the training wheels, and there's a lot to be explored. It kind of feels like it's just getting started, you know.
Well, that's great, isn't it? That you're beginning to go a little bit deeper. Yes, there's a lot of stuff you can do with a bicycle without the training wheels, but you'll never learn how to ride the bicycle without training wheels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And you can actually think of it like this, then the sitting practice of meditation is the training wheels.
Yeah.
And yet most of the students think of that meditation is what you do by sitting on the floor and closing your eyes and putting your body in a particular position, because that was what it was in the time, let us say, when Christianity had some value.
Right.
When there were actually monks in monasteries.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
But Protestantism threw the baby out with the bathwater. In fact, what they did is they threw the baby out and kept the bathwater. That's Protestant Christianity.
Yes. Yes.
And so that whole quality then is that meditation is assuming a particular posture. And when they saw what was happening in Asia, they said, oh, we know what that is. But really, the word meditation is not a very good thing to look at. That a much better word to use would be bhavana, and that we can use it in the sense of sita bhavana. And sita is normally translated into English as the mind, but in many, many cases, in the Thai translations of the Pali Sutras, they actually translate that sita or chitta as emotion. It's the emotional part of the mind. And that's really what we need to train. We need to train our emotions so that we feel good all the time, as opposed to feeling bad, which is basically back to survival mode.
Yeah. I noticed, and I just sort of got in a space where I was just thinking about my body completely differently, and you know, being really in touch with my muscles and just feeling my stomach, um, and uh, and it really got me to another level of sort of selflessness, where I wasn't thinking about myself as anything but exactly what I am, you know.
That's a good point. Let's follow that line for a moment. Most children are taught about their bodies in the sense of, and the parents don't really know that they're doing this, but they teach it in the sense of a sexual object. And we look at beauty as if it were desirability or attraction. In fact, being attractive is exactly the same thing in our English language as being beautiful, which means being desirable. And so young girls, teenage girls, are now looking at Cover Girl magazine or whatever like that and seeing the bodies, or at least the outside images of other girls, and then they start to compare themselves to that. So that the human body for the Western culture is something precious that needs to be taken care of, but that is ultimately and inherently malfunctioned and not good enough. Even the beauty queens, when they're on stage with other beauty queens, are still looking down upon themselves, finding their own faults. But it's really got nothing to do with physical beauty, because in fact, that's looking at your own body with your eyes rather than with your feelings. To go into the body is something that that students are not taught. Now, it can be picked up inherently when people go into sports and music.
Mm-hmm.
Depends upon what music they're playing, or the sport that they're playing. But many times, sports people just naturally get into the body in order to be able to do the sport. And so, an example of that would be the ballerina or the dancer. And she will say that when she's dancing, she feels free. But when she stops dancing, her life is miserable. Now, why would that be? Well, because when she's dancing, she's in the body, she's out of the head. She's experiencing the exhilarations of the movements and acceleration that we have if we're looking at it engineering. That there is a lot of new equipment on the market that wasn't there 50 and 60 years ago, like motion sensing equipment and that kind of stuff. But inside the body, we sense motion, we sense gravity. It's part of the proprioceptive sensing system. And so this is why some like the acceleration of a motorcycle, gives them that exhilaration. But sometimes the girlfriend on the back of that motorcycle is just completely terrified because she does not like those sensations because she's not used to them. So exhilaration and acceleration, and what I mean by acceleration, not just in fact of speeding up and going in one direction, but movements, turns, that kind of stuff. Even to the point of becoming weightless. That's also a sensation. Why? Because we're so used to gravity that when we're in the state of falling, that means that the gravity, I don't want to go into the technical details, but basically when someone is falling, they feel weightless. And they've been able to demonstrate that in airplanes by going very, very high, and then the airplane will go straight down. And as it's going straight down, everybody feels like that they're in a weightless state.
Mm-hmm.
This is used in NASA for training astronauts, and every one of them, in fact, it's got a word for it, a name for it, and they call it the vomit comet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because they feel really weird, empty inside because the gravitational forces are not there anymore. And so as they experience the body, it sometimes can go into convulsions and whatnot like that. But the point that I'm getting into here is that as we're growing up, we our whole society does many things to take us at least outside of the body, or at least to the surface of the body in the sense of what can be seen, as opposed to actually living inside of the body.
Mm-hmm.
Putting our awareness deep inside. And so there's this area, this hara here is it's so wonderful in there. Just to be inside a human body is just so marvelous, so magnificent.
You can't do anything but just be in the moment. You know, it's just and when I did it the first time, it felt like, man, I have really neglected my body for my entire life. I've always thought of my body as some magical, thing full of stuff that just works, and I never
Mm-hmm.
thought about it, And
Well,
but if you do,
exactly,
you immediately try to put it out of your mind because you don't want to think about it. You just want
exactly,
to.
because that's the source of all of the emotions that we want to get rid of. And so we associate with being inside the body as being in a state of emotion rather than a state of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. But now you
Yeah.
can begin to see it from a completely different way.
And it got me thinking about the charnel ground meditation. And I was like, there was some hesitation. I was like, I should look up a video and do that. And I was like, I don't want to do that. And then I was like, what the hell am I scared of? You know?
Yes, that's so amazing. From time to time, I'll recommend go look at an autopsy, go watch it,
And it was
and
great to
it looks
do.
so.
It was great to do because it didn't take long to develop a sort of, you know, objective relationship. I mean, I'm sure you can go deeper with the meditation. You know, I don't want to end up killing myself or something like like the monks from the, I don't know, I've always heard that story.
Um, yes, that's because the Buddha was off in another area.
Uh-huh. Okay.
He would have given them better directions. No, that was the problem with that. That's why he was more careful with charnel ground meditations later,
Hmm.
was because, uh, but let's look at it from various points of view for just a second, because most people, when they hear that story, they either say, oh, the Buddha was wrong to give them the charnel ground meditations, and charnel ground meditations must be terrible that people kill themselves by doing that meditation, and they must have gotten really depressed. But there's other ways of looking at it, and that the other way of looking at it is that, well, maybe not. Maybe, in fact, um, the monk came to the point of recognizing that all things decay, all things disappear, and that staying alive is a lot of work.
Hmm. Yeah.
Staying
That is.
alive is a lot of work, and I'm going to wind up like this anyway. And so I think it was partly because of the injunctions from the Catholic Church that has so affected Western society that in many places it's against the law to kill yourself. And yet, throughout history, going into battle, going into war was actually suicidal. If you've got a pitched battle where people have got bows, arrows, knives, swords, and that kind of stuff, people are probably going to die, and they know it. And so there has been many forms of suicide all along, and that the Western society is unlike. For instance, in Japan, with the divine wind, the kamikaze, that it can be done with the right attitude.
Hmm.
That flying this airplane full of TNT into that battleship is probably the best thing that I'll ever be able to do.
Or like the monks who protested Vietnam.
Precisely.
Hmm.
Actually, I was very close to that.
Mm.
This happened in Charlotte, North Carolina. I forget what year, but it was in the middle 2000s, and that the Vietnamese government was still doing some really nasty stuff. And this monk emulated himself in North Carolina, right there at the temple. That I arrived
Wow.
there when the fire trucks were still there. And I got there about 7 in the morning. He had emulated himself at about 4 a.m., 5 a.m., or something like that. And he did it in protest to what the Vietnamese government was. But there was some side problems with that actually made life difficult for many of the people who were associated with that temple in Charlotte. Oh, did it get bad press, for one thing. He got a lot of bad press for doing that. One
Yeah.
of the points about the bad press is that the Vietnamese government didn't even know that he had done that. That if he really wanted to make a protest, he should have gone to Hanoi and done it right out in the center of a place where, like the monks did in the 70s.
Yeah.
But emulating oneself here. Here's the thing about the monks: if he can emulate himself, set the body on fire, and then sit there, because there have been other protesters who did not have the mental control, that they would emulate themselves, and then after they're on fire, they say, "Wait a minute! Oh my gosh!" and they start to get up and run and roll on the ground or do anything to put the fire out. That they've changed their mind.
Yeah, I've seen a picture of that, a monk running through the street, but I've also seen the one of him sitting still and um
Well, you can imagine
mhm.
that either you have the mind to um, that's tough enough and strong enough to actually sit there with strong determination through all of the pain and suffering of the emulation, or you can see there's a different kind of strength of mind, and that strength of mind is actually, let's go to the bottom line, and that is that after the fire starts and the flames are there, the point for the monk to do is to now take a really, really strong, deep in breath. Bring that fire in and let it completely destroy the lungs. And then things will be over really quickly.
Mm. Yeah.
But
I
if you just sit there and hold the breath, then the body burns on the outside. But if you take really, really deep breaths and let that hot, fiery air come into the lungs, there's no oxygen in that fire, but there is the fire, and it's going to completely destroy the lungs. That will be his last breath. And so
I yeah.
they
I can't
prepare for that.
imagine I can't imagine being at that level, but that's left to monks, I think. But
I
uh
think that's going a little too far. I will at least put that out. I don't see any real reason. I don't care about anything enough.
yeah. 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 That's another thing I thought is like, I don't know, probably different uh, you know, Tibetan monks and Theravada and Thai forests, they probably have a different stance on um, political activism, because it seems to be sort of like, I don't know, uh, I don't know what a true Buddhist. What do you think the Buddhist position would be on political activism?
I would say it like this, because I've got a very good example of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa. First off, we have to understand, going to the point of right speech, and I won't spend much time on right speech, but one of the qualities of right speech is that we don't tell deliberate lies. And that's really important. Another one is that we don't use harsh speech. Another one is that we don't use malicious speech. Malicious gossip is like person A talking to person B about person C with the intention that person B does not like person C anymore. In other words, it's malicious gossip in the sense that you're turning a friend against another friend. This is really malicious. It's also what you would call a Sangha Dasasa, or a division in the Sangha, if you go around trashing monks. And so there's actually Patty Monk. items for that. But now that we've gotten that point about what is right speech, that means that normally protesting is seen as being harsh. Protesting also is seen as malicious gossip in the sense that you're trying to get this group of people to hate the government or to hate what the government's doing. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that kind of protesting, which is all the protesting that I know, would be not then right speech. However, when one becomes dedicated to the truth itself can then become a protest. But the issue is not the intention of telling or protesting. The intention is to tell the truth. And you've heard me say this before. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free, but first it'll piss you off. So when good monks like the Buddha and Bhikkhu Buddhadasa are out there telling the truth, he's going to make enemies. And when you're talking to someone in private, you can control it. But if you're speaking in public so that one person hears it and they get the intention, it might be overheard by someone who is not ready for that kind of thing. And then they're the ones who are going to get angry. This happened with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa when he was telling the truth by giving lectures at I think a nursing school back in the 1930s. And that some of the people in that audience didn't like what he was saying at all. And that's why he got into so much trouble with the Sangha Dasesa. But he was exonerated in that Sangha Dasesa because he could prove, and the proving took literally months from what I understood, that what he was teaching was correct. And that what everybody believed, in fact, was not in the suttas, that it was coming from much later time periods. That in fact there is no place in the suttas to where rebirth is used in the concept of reincarnation. Look at the word birth or born for a moment. Because you've got something that should have been, you got a newborn right there. So, birth, actually think of it as the same kind of word, birth and born, have the same root. And we hear airborne diseases and waterborne diseases. What that means now is that the birth process has a carrying quality or a movement quality. So that when rebirth is spoken of in the noble way, many Buddhists who are associated with rebirth in the form of reincarnation, they don't like it at all. They do not want to actually hear the teachings of the Buddha. They would rather hear the teachings of Buddhism. And so now let's look at the way that the Buddha actually used rebirth, or the way that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is using rebirth. You have heard possibly from either Buddhism or Hinduism about the various ways to be reincarnated. You can be reincarnated into hell, Naroka, or Naro. You can be born as an animal. You can be reborn as a ghost or a preta, called a hungry ghost. Or you can be born in a heavenly realm. You probably heard of these 4 different possibilities. Or you can be reborn as a human. This is basically what most people do. Whenever they have rebirth experiences that get advertised, very rarely is anybody having the rebirth of being a worm. or reborn. The last time I was, the last body I had, I was in hell. People don't have that. Oh no, when I'm reborn always as a human. Many of them will have rebirth experiences like the favorite one I hear is Cleopatra. There's at least 10,000 women running around Asia right now who believe that they are the reincarnation of Cleopatra.
Yeah.
But let's look at what the real rebirth is. The real rebirth is that which is born, it bears us or creates the self. So let's look at, for instance, the Preta or the hungry ghost. Now, the hungry ghost is often depicted as a balloon-like character where the balloon is full up with air, with a very, very small mouth, except that it's not really a balloon that's using air pressure to blow it out, but it's a vessel that is empty inside, working very hard to get filled. It's hungry, and that the mouth is so small that the amount of nourishment that gets in is insufficient to maintain the homeostasis. Therefore, it's in a constant state of hunger. Well, now look how many people are in America are in that kind of state just quite naturally. You'd go so far as to say the richer someone is, the more money they have, the more likely they're in that state of hunger, wanting more and more and more and more, not ever getting enough. Some people are like that with food, that they feel hungry all the time, and that they don't actually look at the sensations of the body. They're looking at more of the mentality of being hungry, thinking that food is going to solve the problem. And so they gorge themselves on food. King Henry VIII is a clear example of a preta, a hungry ghost. I've got one wife, I've got two wives. It doesn't matter how many wives I have, I'm not satisfied. Well, let's look at the advanced meditator for a second and recognize that he is normally not in a state of hunger, but sometimes we fall into a state of hunger, a state of wanting. This is actually these hell states or these places that we can be reborn into are actually real states. And they are associated with suffering, but most importantly, they're also associated with the self that's being reborn. So that we say, I am hungry or I want something. Now, we've already talked about any time that we like something, if we're ignorant, then that liking will turn into wanting. That's when we turn into a hungry ghost, is when I like something, I want it. And the more I want it, the more in hell I am, the more empty I feel.
Yeah, that's pretty common here.
Yes.
Even
So
with
now
me.
let's look at another one, and that is the hell itself. Hell, the hell realms, is when we're hot. In the Thai language, they have the term Jairon, which means a hot heart. And we can see that when someone is angry or when someone is in a state of anxiety, then we have been reborn then in this state of hell, the worst way that we can feel. And so this is the hell state. And We talk ourselves into it, literally.
Yeah.
The next one then is let's do animals next. If you think about animals, we have one of the qualities of an animal is that they're not very smart. They're stupid, foolish. And one of the quality of an animal, especially the domesticated animals, is that they do what they're told to do. But even wild animals, when they're in their tribe or their group or their pack or their pride or whatever, they have to follow the rules of the pride. And so that's one of the qualities of an animal is that it does what it's told to do. It's drudgery. We become draft animals. We, in fact, even when we're maybe high class intellectuals with a high degree sitting at our desk doing a job, oftentimes we do that job quite foolishly. Even though the job itself is an intellectual job, we're still doing it like we were an animal. In other words, we're doing what we're told to do. Maybe we're expecting a reward later. So I do what I'm told to do. Maybe I'll get some groceries after this because I'm completely dependent upon something else and that I'm not thinking correctly. So this is another hell state, is to be reborn as an animal.
Yeah.
The fourth kind is what is normally thought of as a heavenly state, but the name of this heaven is the Asura. The Asuras in the Hindu system is very much like the Titans in the Greek system. Now, you know that the Titans are the warriors, but they don't like to go to war. They're not at war a lot. And not only that, but it's kind of a lesser god, which means if they go to war with the bigger gods, they'll probably lose. Now, let's look at this word Asura as the word sure. When you're sure of something, then you're confident. But Asura means that you're not confident, that you expect to lose the war. So the warriors here are actually afraid. And so our states of fear, whenever we're out of a state of confidence or when we're no longer sure of stuff, when we become confused, when we become trying to look for some wiggle room, etc., like that. Now we're born in a heavenly state, but this heavenly state is certainly not the kind of heaven that we would like because it's full of fear. So now let's review these four states. We've got hell itself, which is anxiety, is anger. We've got the state of the preta, the state of wanting things, not being able to be satisfied. We have the animal world, which is the world of doing a job, a draft animal, not able to feed ourselves, etc., like that. No longer a wild animal out there. And then the last one is these asuras, which are filled with fear. And so these are the four ways that humans can be reborn. And when you're not in one of these hell states, then you're human.
Yeah.
And so let's not be born into these things. And if you look at it in another way, now we're looking at all of the emotions that we started to talk about in the beginning. If we can find ourselves in a state of comfortableness, in a state of satisfaction, then we want to maintain that state, because the only place that you can go from a state of satisfaction is into one of these hell realms.
Yeah, right.
And so this is the way that the Buddha looks at that. So the difference then between reincarnation and rebirth is that people are actually born in hell. in reincarnation. In the Buddha's way of looking at, oh no, you can be reborn in hell within the next 30 seconds. All I have to do is say a few words you don't like, and I'll send you right to hell.
That's really clear to me, and I think a lot of Western. If you try to listen to any Western Buddhist podcast, I think that they're all, some of them, they have to pay lip service to the reincarnation. It feels like, and one guy was talking about a toku or something who had who had been found, and he was brought back to the monastery or whatever, and he said, "Oh, I remember that. I remember that podium from my past life," and they were like, "Well, we only built it 3 years ago."
Years ago.
But it gets even worse, because you would think that the guy talking about it, he would be like, that's proof of not of non-reincarnation. He was like, no, he had just he had actually been seeing into the future somehow, of where he was going to be. So the logical leaps of that they're making, it's sometimes I just have to turn off the podcast.
I know. Well, going back to that issue that you were talking about before, about let us say, do nobles protest? The answer is no, they tell the truth. But the truth is often dangerous to tell the truth. And so we go along to get along. When we talk about rebirth and reincarnation as an actual thing, in a way, you are reborn as an animal right then in order to talk about it.
Right.
Now, one of the things that I have known for quite a long time, possibly 35 years or so, was that the Dalai Lama himself was noble. That he has actually been to visit Wat Suan Mok and spent time with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, and Dalai Lama has also sent from time to time Tibetan monks to stay at Wat Suan Mok. And so from that kind of thing, I've known that the Dalai Lama was noble. He's expected to be noble. Look at the place that he's in. And he was also one of those kids that was grabbed up out of his mommy's arms and taken to the temple. And he spent his whole life among good monks. Quite possibly some of them could have been noble and gave him a noble education. The reason I'm bringing him up is that now the Dalai Lama is openly talking about being noble. But he's using it in a way that's a little bit, let us say, occult or hidden, so that only those who know how to hear what he's saying. What he has done just recently, we've known that he has had plans for doing this since the middle 1990s, but he's just now getting around to doing it. And that is the tradition that he was in, and the tradition that you just talked about. They're going to stop that. The Tibetans are no longer going out and looking for little boys who have been said to be the reincarnation of some old dead monk. He's going to put a stop to that.
It's going to be like a meritocracy or something, essentially, where they choose someone that's like Tibet, you know.
The reason that he's behind that is because the Chinese government has called their bluff. They did it with the Panchen Lama. When the Panchen Lama was designated, the Chinese government kidnapped the kid. And nobody knows where the Panchen Lama is. but they do know that there has been a substitute, that the actual Panchen Lama that was designated to this ceremony, they don't know where he is, but the Chinese government says, we got the Panchen Lama. And so the Dalai Lama now is saying, we're going to stop that, because I don't want the Chinese government to come grab some kid and say he's the Dalai Lama.
Yeah, I saw some interview with that where they were talking about who the next Dalai Lama is going to be, and he said that he thought they should just choose someone, you know.
I'm not coming back. I'm
Yeah,
not coming
right.
back. It ain't me. In fact, he has been known to say that years ago, that he's not coming back. But not only now is he saying he's not coming back himself, he's saying we're going to put an end to this ceremonial choosing.
Yeah.
But they've only been doing it for about 700 years, and you can see how it got started. It's very easy to see how it got started. You can imagine a group of monks with a bag of tricks going up into a village, finding some kid they like, and then going to mom and say, hey, we really like your kid. Why don't you let him come and live in our monastery? Do you think mom's going to let her kid go? 3-year-old kid? Not a chance. But if they come with this trinket, this bag of toys, and they say, oh, we think that your child is very, very holy, up to do. He's the Dalai, or he's the Panchen, or he's something like that. Here, let's prove it. And so they get all of these goodies out of the bag and let the kid play with the toys that he wants to play with. And then they say, guess what? The toys he learned to play with, those are the ones he had in his past life. That proves that he is the Panchen or the Dalai or something. And then mommy will let him go to the temple.
Yeah.
All right. So they've been doing that for 700 years, and the Chinese government's called their bluff on it. And so the Dalai Lama is saying, let's stop that. Let's no longer do that stuff. But he is not the only spiritual leader in the Tibetan tradition. And there has already been quite a lot of resistance to that. You shall tell the truth will set you free, Mr. Dalai Lama, but it's going to piss off everybody else.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested in the social pressure that goes on behind him becoming the Dalai Lama, and then probably coming to the realization that becoming noble, let's say, and then having to sort of prop up this institution, you know, and not wanting to undermine it. I'm thinking about, Jiddu Krishnamurti, you know who that is?
Yes.
You heard of him? Where he was sort of chosen to be this new spiritual leader by this group of, I think, they were Western group of spiritual people.
I know who they were. Right.
And then
Colonel Ledbetter and oh gosh, Madame Blansky.
And then he becomes noble, it seems, and he just says, "Screw all that,
screw all of that."
This is which I don't know how his speaking would ever help anybody. It seemed like it only confused people, but I tend to I like.
But it takes an ear. You have to hear what he's saying.
Yeah.
And most people they don't understand it. They don't get it.
But just seeing him and his amount of energy at his age and his just his assuredness, I think there's just something to that. I will watch his talks even just because there's just something to him. That's one of the
qualities. That's one of the qualities, you see. That's the Shura, as the heaven of confidence
Mhm.
that I've talked to you about the 3 kinds of doubt. Doubt about who made this mess. We found out, oh, it's me. Then we say, can I do it? Am I up to the task? Is the second kind of doubt. And the third kind of doubt is this the path?
Yeah.
Am I up to it? And can I do it? And do I have the right tools that I need to do it? And so these are the 3 kinds of doubt. And when those doubts are eradicated, then we become sure of the Dhamma.
Mhm.
And that's one of the ways that you can tell a noble is because they do it without a doubt. They don't have any questions left. Or all of the questions that they do have are just incidental, unimportant questions. But all the really big stuff, like who the hell am I? I'm not. Where the hell am I going? I'm here. I'm not going anywhere.
Well, I'm about to have to
What's
go.
it all about? All
I
right.
got a sick
Well,
kiddo. Any
well, let
advice
me
on
make
my
yeah, one last thing is now that we've talked about these hell realms, make sure when you start to go into one that you know that you're going into it so that you don't. And
Say
they
that
can
one more
use it
time,
with
Dhammarato. Sorry about that.
the now that you know about these hell realms in the terms of the hell realms, make sure that you don't. So as you're about to go into one, wakey, wakey,
Mm-hmm.
if you catch yourself into that you're in the hell realm, if you're in anxiety, if you're in a state of anger, recognize that you're in hell. This is the worst you could be. Take a deep breath, get it back into the body, and be here now. That's basically the practice, is to avoid being reborn.
That's really clear now. That's really clear. It's just there always seems to be, with every level, some new thing that comes along. I'm thinking, what is that new thing going to be? But the path at least is clear. So, so anyway, great talk. Great talk. Have a
good day.
You too.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
Go take